Welcome to 15 Minutes in the Book of Revelation. I am Pastor Chester Hitchcock, and in this series we are walking through the book of Revelation one passage at a time and only spending approximately 15 minutes. So that if you have a very busy schedule and you don't have time to watch a sermon, you can get into the book of Revelation just a little bit at a time and draw some really neat things out. So in this particular lesson, we're going to be finishing chapter 1. And this makes the fourth 15-minute presentation just in chapter 1. So as you can see, there is an awful lot of information. And in fact, what I want to do today is to go back and modify a little bit of what I had said in the earlier lesson. Because in the last lesson, I talked about these 6 symbols of Christ that are shown in chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. I want to modify that because there are actually 7 symbols of Christ that are laid out here. And we don't want to miss any of the symbols. Number 1, because each symbol is very important. But number 2 is these symbols also lay out some very important interpretative skills, how to understand and how to interpret the book of Revelation. So back up to verse 16 where I had left off on the last one, and we had talked about these symbols. And in verse 16 it said he had in his right hand 7 stars. Out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. Having those 7 stars is symbolic of nothing can take us out of his hand. And those 7 stars represent the 7 angels or the 7 messengers, and this is all symbolic of his ability to be able to protect the saints while he is judging. He has the 7 stars in his right hand. This sharp 2-edged sword is symbolic of his ability in judgment to be able to cut away the wicked, to destroy the wicked, and yet to be able to cut away the blame of those who are struggling with problems in their lives. Symbol number 7 says that his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. Let's not miss this. What is the sun? The S-U-N. The sun is the light of the world. And didn't Jesus say that he was the light of the world? That we through him are the light of the world. Now in Matthew Poole's English annotation of the Bible, he says, and his countenance was like the sun shining forth in its strength, that it means that he was very glorious, so as the apostle was not able to behold. And that's all that Matthew Poole says about this. But other commentaries point out the importance of this symbol of being Jesus is the light of the world. Another important thing about seeing all 7 of them is, as I had shared with you before, the numbers in the book of Revelation are very important because they are to be understood in terms of quality more than quantity. So when we look at these numbers, we see that the number 7 comes up over and over again because the number 7 stands for perfection and completion. And we see the 7 churches and the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls and so on and so forth. That number keeps coming up. Here in chapter 1, we begin with a 7. This 7 is the 7 symbols of Christ. Another important thing to understand is the writers in those days, when they wrote apocalyptic literature and using these symbols, they would outline what they wanted to talk about. When we make an outline, we'll have a number 1, and then we'll have A, B, C, and we'll have a number 2, and A, B, C. And so A, B, and C relates to number 1, and A, B, and C relates to number 2. That's not how they outlined things in apocalyptic literature. Their outline was known as a chiasm. And a chiasm, it could be a 3 points, 5 points, 7 points. To understand how the chiasm outline works is it works in a triangle like this. And so in this triangle, then you would have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. The number 4 in a 7-point chiasm is the most important point. Now we might have in our outline number 1 being the most important point, but in a 7-point chiasm, number 4 is the most important. And in number 1, if we look at these symbols of Christ, we would see that number 1 and number 7 correlate, that number 2 and number 6 correlate, that number 3 and number 5 correlates, and that number 4 is the most important. And when we look at how they correlate, number 1 is talking about the 7 candlesticks in which Jesus is in the midst, and the candlesticks represent the church, which is the light of the world. And number 7 is with Jesus's face shining like the sun, which shows that he is the light of the world. And that the second symbol of him being the Son of Man, who is the judge who is able to destroy, correlates with number 6. Because number 6, he has a two-edged sword coming out of his mouth, that he can destroy the wicked, but he can also, in doing so, cut away the blame of the saints. And that number 3 and number 5 correlate in that number 3, he is clothed down to his feet in a robe, which means that this priestly robe, he carries our blame as the priest, correlates actually with in his right hand having the 7 stars, which is number 5. And that his 4th symbol was symbolizing him being able to judge the church. And those four characteristics are in this 4th symbol, that his hair was like white as wool, showing that he has wisdom to judge, that his eyes flamed like fire, so that he had the knowledge to be able to judge us by his experience, that his feet were like burnished brass, in that he was able to trample upon Satan, and that his voice was like the sound of many waters, meant that all of those who went before and to witness for him as well testify of him. So it's important that we understand that not only the point of this 7th symbol, but how it ties together with all of the rest as well. Then, of course, in verse 17, John says, "When I saw him, I fell at his feet like I was dead, and he laid his right hand on me." Which hand? His right hand, in which he holds the 7 stars, because nothing can snatch us out of his hand. And it says, "And he laid his right hand on me, saying to me, 'Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last.'" Verse 18 says, "I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And I have the keys to Hades and death." Nothing can prevent Jesus from rescuing us. And then he says, "Write these things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place." And then in verse 20, he explains, as we had pointed out before, the mystery of 2 of the symbols. When he says, "The mystery of the 7 stars, which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands," the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 church, or the angelos, or the messengers of the 7 churches. And that the 7 lampstands, or candlesticks, which you saw, are the 7 churches. In our next lesson, we're going to get into each one of these 7 churches. But let me pull the curtain back and give you just a little snippet about these 7 churches, because again, the number 7 comes up repeatedly. The first time we find it is here in chapter 1, demonstrating the 7 symbols of Christ. Then we're going to get into the 7 churches, and we're going to look at each one of them specifically. But let me point out that the 7 churches, theologians see these 7 churches in several different ways. One, that each of the 7 churches represent 7 eras of church. The last era being the Laodicean church, the lukewarm church, which they usually identify to our culture right before Christ comes. There are also, don't forget, they are 7 real churches. John wrote to 7 real churches. I also pointed out that scholars say that there were more than 7 churches. So when we're reading the book of Revelation, don't forget the fact that he's dealing with a real problem then, as well as prophetic things for us as well. These were 7 types of churches. As a pastor of nearly 30 years, I've been in a number of different churches, and each church seems to have different gifts and different talents and different types. And some churches may be a bit like the Ephesus church, where they seem to have lost their first love. And some churches are sort of a Philadelphian church, where they have brotherly love. And so we can see different types of churches even today. There are also 7 experiences that we might face in church. There might be times when we have felt like we've lost our first love, or when we feel like that we have brotherly love. So these are 7 different experiences, which means that there can be 7 different kinds of people and worshipers in the church as well. So when we get into these 7 churches, we will find a lot of meaning for us here today. If this has been helpful, give me a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed yet, don't forget to click on that subscribe button, ring the bell, and be sure to choose all so that you can get a notification the next time that a video comes up. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.